Welcome this afternoon to our 2026 Black History panel conversation. And I'm very happy today to introduce to some of you our good colleagues and friends that are from around the PCUSA, Mid-Council leaders and agency leader that is here today. I am the Reverend Dr. Sandana Gallman Ashley, and I am the Synod leader for the Synod of the Northeast. And I'm very happy to introduce to you my colleague, the Reverend Dr. Floretta Watkins. She is the stated clerk and executive for the Synod of the Mid-Atlantic. The Reverend Dr. Rose Niles. She is the Ministry Relations Officer for the Northeast region of the Presbyterian Foundation. The Reverend Dr. Mary Newbern Williams, and she is the Transitional Executive Presbyter for New York City Presbytery. The Reverend Dr. Craig Howard of the Presbytery. He's the executive presbyter for the Presbytery of Chicago. And last but not least, Reverend Dr. Bruce Grady from New Hope Presbytery. I'm very happy to have these colleagues today who have served faithfully in the Presbyterian Church, and we're here to have this conversation around why we are still talking about Black history in 2026. But before we begin our panel, I want to set the stage just a little. Today, it is a common perspective that we live in a post-racial society. And many people believe that this is an old, tired conversation, and maybe even a divisive conversation. Many believe that because we have had our first Black president, and we've had our first Black female vice president, and we have had, even within the Presbyterian Church U.S.A., our first Black stated clerk, and we've had our first Black president and executive director of the former Presbyterian Mission Agency. And many of us on this panel today are sitting in our roles as the first. And so the question is whether we still need to have this conversation when so much progress has been made. And I want to say that we certainly have had progress, and things are not what they used to be. But milestones, although they matter, they do represent progress. What they don't do is totally change our reality. We still know that representation alone, and even leadership in the highest form, does not mean that we have totally dismantled inequity, and nor does it mean that history has stopped shaping who we are as a country today. And so one of the questions as we begin our dialogue is why this conversation is still relevant and even necessary. And so I invite each of you as we begin our conversation to share a little bit about your personal journey, what has shaped you as a leader, what has been transformative since you have claimed your seat at the table. What has it been for you to work in predominantly white spaces? And finally, as we conclude our conversation today, and it feels much like we continue this dance of one step forward and two steps backwards. What sustains your hope? Where do you see signs of courage, possibilities, and meaningful change emerging? Thank you so much for being here and being a part of this conversation. And let's begin our dialogue. Who would like to get us started? Flo, you're smiling. You ready to get us started? Why is this conversation still important today? So, Flo, you're
Yes,
muted.
I am. Yes, I am. Yes. So first of all, thank you. Thank you for engaging this topic, this conversation. I'm reminded, I think it was Carter G. Woodson who was the founder of Black History, Black History Month. And I remember taking a class with Dr. Kofer, who was like the theologian slash biblical scholar par excellence as it dealt with Black people in the Bible. And yet, even now, um, centuries later, there's still a blatant absence of Black history in textbooks and curriculum. And you can't have conversations without the full story. So I want to start there. The full story has not been told yet. And because the full story hasn't been told yet, people are redacting our stories. People are excluding our stories, and people are making up stories. And they were trying to remove our stories from curriculum, from libraries. We're burning books, we're banning books, and so we have to continue to have this conversation about Black history because Black history is American history. I don't care how you slice it. If you look at the inventions of Black folks, if you look at the things that we've contributed to this society would not have what it has without Black people. And so we have to continue to have this conversation.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
let
Thank you
me.
so much.
Yeah, I'll piggyback on that with Flo, and that is the Carter G. Woodson idea of Negro History Week that became Black History Month. Two significant pieces. One was his emphasis to say we should not study Black history, but we should study Blacks in history. Blacks in history. So that goes back to say American history is Black history and vice versa. The other thing that always strikes me about this is that his move to create this study of the Black in history came from the race riots of 1919 that they hit here in Chicago and other places. And I always said, how do you look at a riot, a horrible event, and in this case, Chicago, where 38 people killed, and you walk away and say, what these people need is a better understanding of history. And it's not that these people, as in the Black people, it's all people. Because
Mhm.
Carter G. Woodson is also one that talks about how when we don't do history right, we also pervert the dominant culture and their ability, because then they assume they did it all. They didn't have any help, all this other stuff that's been falsely said around. So yeah, I just want to pick up on those couple of points.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I'll join in. Bruce Grady from New Hope Presbytery. Um, like my colleagues have already stated, there is power in story, and there is a particular kind of power when you recognize who's telling the story. So it is important for us to tell our own stories. Throughout my studies, I've worked with John Hope Franklin, Gardner C. Taylor, Samuel DeWitt Proctor, and even Maya Angelou. I was a page for her for 3 consecutive years. And what I love about these individuals is that they understood the power of telling our story. And then taking this a step further into some of the um, scholars of African American story, history, and so forth. W.E.B. Du Bois talked about the notion or the theory of double consciousness, which is a reality for us. And that is to say that there is a reality in which the dominant white culture sees the world, but there is a reality in which we as people of African descent living in America see the world that is different, that is takes into account the values, the purpose, the social, political, economic realities of Black existence in the United States. So it's important for me. I'm a father. I have two young adult children, and I want them to hear the truth. And I don't think there's anyone more qualified to tell them the truth than us. So that's why this is relevant for us.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'd like to just share as well what my colleagues have spoken. I'd like to approach this from the standpoint of being holistic and telling the whole truth, telling the truth about how our nation, this nation, began, what happened before, and that people of African descent had a life, history, culture, background long before 1619, long before the first people of African descent were noted to have come. I have read that there are those who share that as far back as 800 BC, there were African explorers who came to what we now know as Mexico and dealt very peacefully and well with the people who were there. And, having read a lot of that, having visited Mexico, seen the Olmec statues that many historians feel were a tribute to the African explorers, and others share that they were tributes to Asian explorers. So learning what really happened is probably always going to be a discussion, a debate. But when we look at the world holistically and we want to say what is truthful, what really happened, and how things came to be, we will consider all sides and not just one, which, as I was growing up, history was told from the European side. It was when I went, my first year in high school was the first year our high school offered Black history. And I sat in the front row, directly in front of the teacher. He couldn't see anybody's face but mine. And because I was so engaged and involved, and he engaged the whole class. There was no talking, no carrying on. Everybody was fully invested in what was being shared. And having grown up in a family that taught me Black history and people who contributed to that history, I always embraced it and wanted to know. So I really look at approaching our historical work from telling the truth and telling the whole truth, and in a way that others will embrace, desire, and really want to know.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, I would love to pick up on some of these threads. The From the perspective of the African diaspora, which is part of the tradition that I come out of in terms of the West Indian father who left the West Indies, came to America early in the 20s and lived through the Harlem Renaissance, and then found, through his being a merchant sailor, found my mother on the other side of the world. So, but as the first kid born in the Bronx, we participate in this sense of the African diaspora. So Black history matters not only to us in the context of America, it matters to us in the context of the larger story, the whole story, as I've been hearing us talking about. And that whole story is absolutely critical to our children. And right now, the children are so on my heart, that, and I would say all children need to hear the whole story, But children of the African diaspora really need to hear the whole story because of the distorted ways that it has been told and continues to be told. We're taking steps backward, as you referenced, rather than forward in this matter. And that means that it really falls to us. I want to give a personal testimony to the power of being a young person in the Synod of the Northeast. I was a teenager, very active in the Synod of the Northeast when we used to have lots of racial ethnic caucus activities that involved young people. And John Chapman led a college-aged tour to East Africa. And we learned there that the Maasai greeting isn't hi, hello, how are you? It is, how are the children? And the reply is, the children are well. Well, the fear that I have, and I know many of us share, is that the children are not well. Maybe our children are well, but the children as a whole are not well. And I see it with my nieces and nephews. I see it with extended family members. The struggle, I see it, the worry I have now for my grandchildren. We really do need to acknowledge that it's so critical to tell the whole story. The other thing that John Chapman did for me is he saw me as a mixed race, Black identified girl, beginning to really struggle with racial identification. So he began to introduce me to people around the PCUSA, leaders around the PCUSA, who looked like me, who could begin to tell me stories of history, like about Ellen and William Craft, who escaped from the Deep South because she looked like me and she could pretend to be the master. And they became famous abolitionists. I later found out that I'm related to that family by marriage. One of my cousins is a direct descendant of that family. So if we don't have people, if we don't become the people, in fact, who begin to look for the children and pick them up. I remember Katie Cannon telling a story about how her grandmother, her ancestor who came out of slavery, walked around this Deep South picking up all her children, and that really is our role. And that is why we have to defend not just Black History Month. I had a member of a congregation that I served come to me after I'd been there for like maybe 2 months, and that included Black History Month. And he said, Pastor, I just need to ask you, when is Black History Month going to be over? And I said, look at the children. Look at the children of this church. It's not ever going to be over as long as I'm here as your pastor, because they need to hear this. And that shaping of identity leads to strength in our lives. So, but I also agree with the thread that others have lifted. It's not just for us. We cannot be a healthy society. We cannot be whole unless we tell the whole story.
Thank you so much for all of your comments. It just really, every time I hear us tell our story, there's something that rises within me. My shoulders begin to square as I think about our history, all the things we've learned, and really how we build one another up as we continue to share our own journeys and our own learning. I just want to share real quickly that my home church is New Life Presbyterian Church in Atlanta. And at the time when I became Presbyterian, Lonnie Oliver was the pastor there. And I knew something about Black history. But I learned so much in that church that helped me to connect my theology, my understanding of God, my worldview, my self-worth as a child of God, that Imago Dei, really being able to celebrate who I was and to be able to see that as gift. And that church, in the way that we celebrated who we were biblically and defying ourselves in the biblical story, as well as being able to celebrate who we were as the people of God presently. That meant so much to me. And I know for my son and for many people who were in that church, they heard ways of talking about who we were as a people and the struggle as something, not dismissing the struggle, but just seeing how that struggle continued to make us and create us and to give us space. And I really do believe prepared us to be able to serve in the context in which we are serving the church today. So thank you for all of your comments. Any other responses before we go to the next question?
And I'll say one more thing about
Yeah.
the role of history and the what I would call the current imagination of possibility. It is when we know what we have done that we recognize what we can do.
Yes.
And it's also the history concept of back to remembering, remember, if we use it as disjointed, that then becomes back together again when we tell the story. We're having our family reunion here in Chicago area later this year. We try to have one every 2 years, and we're going to bring in like about 140 folk that claimed these Moraine whims and all the names in my family. But one of the things that we do is we tell stories about who we are as a family and how we came to Chicago, for example, and we started businesses and barbershops and we talk about how we prospered in Philadelphia and in New York. And these stories help the next generation say, oh, this is what it means to be African American. This is what is possible. And I just touch one more story. When I was a young man coming up in Chicago area, I was very fortunate because in my Black community, my Black suburb, were businessmen, were accountants, were doctors, were attorneys. I never, how can I say it? I always knew what was possible because of that community and because of that history. So if we turn the light off, if you look at history as a film that's being lighted in various directions, and you turn the light off of that part that says the Black or the African American contribution, you darken what is possible even for the current generation.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That's why you're here. That is why you're here. And I'm telling you, this is such a rich conversation already. The next question is about your journey. You know, what has shaped you as a leader? And really, as you think about the milestones, I don't know how many people are sitting in the seat or at the table as the first, but whether you're the first or not, you know, what has shaped your leadership and what has been important for you to hold on to all of these years as you continue to serve the church and serve in your communities and be that public face and that public theologian? Who would like to get us started?
I will. I
Thank you,
think
Rose.
the most critical piece for me has been my colleagues along the way. You know, being able to be a friend in ministry to each other, and having someone that you can pick up the phone and call. In my longest pastorate, I worked closely with New York Theological Seminary, and I had a colleague there, Eleanor Moody Shepherd, and she would bring me into the seminary to do different things, and then she also joined the staff as then we had parish associates, and we used to switch roles seamlessly, and be there for each other. That person you can pick up the phone and call at midnight. Dr. King talked about the sort of crisis at midnight, when it seems like nobody else is there. And having colleagues like that, and many of you are that to me, you're all that to me. But those key relationships and watering that garden, as Alice Walker would say, cultivating that garden of relationships has really made all the difference along my journey in terms of being able to keep going, even in the face of discouragement and sometimes the difficult circumstances that we encounter, even in the church. So, giving God thanks for all of the people who have shown up for me along the way.
Thank you.
and made it possible for me to show up for them.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Rose. Who else? How would you answer that question?
I can speak to that question. Um, I live with a deep sense of indebtedness because I have personally known my grandmother, my great grandmother, and my grandmother. So um, my eyes have seen back through several generations
Mm,
on my mother's side of the family, and through my conversations with them, I know that I would not be here today if it were not for their sacrifice. And I believe that in the same way that my great grandparents and great great grandparents sacrificed for me, that I have to sacrifice for others.
mm,
For 12 consecutive years, I served at Shaw University, which is at HBCU here in Raleigh, North Carolina. And I think that it was just a joy to have the opportunity to pour into the lives of young Black women and men, and to see their dreams come to fruition. Serving in a university setting has a rhythm, and it culminates with graduation. And I think that graduation was the day, or is the day, in which we held hands
mm,
with each other, but also with the ancestors,
mm,
to say we continue to sacrifice and build a new future. So I'm grateful that I get a chance to do this work of continuing the story within the context, sometimes of higher education, but also within the life of the church.
mhm. Thank you. Thank you so much. Who's next?
I'll speak to one other thing here then. For one, when I don't know what you call me, latecomer Presbyterian. I was raised in the Black church, Black Pentecostal church, and became Presbyterian in like 1999. And I had gotten my MDiv at McCormick already. And part of that, I had taken a course called The History of the Black Church in North America. And then I became Presbyterian, and I went back to those books and said, "Oh, I want to see what, Presbyterian Black church history looks like, right?" And I couldn't find anything. There was nothing, 2 volumes, not a single thing. And then it hit me. Oh, because the Presbyterian church is not a Black church.
Mm,
And so then that made me feel like I was part of a diaspora,
mm,
that this odd thing happened. I'm up in the north in Chicago when all the Black Presbyterians are in the south and the east and all this, and it was like, how do I find my way? But fortunately, like you've all named, surrounded by wonderful people, let me add Black and white and other colors to
mm,
help to steer the journey as I continue to become and be present in this role. At one point, I was kind of flustered at being mid-council leader, and I was considering quitting. And I went and I talked with Warner Darnell, former mid-council
mm,
leader in mid Tennessee, I think. And Warner said to me, he said, you never know when you're up there talking to folks in your presbytery who you're influencing. You
mm,
never know who may go back to their job and say, because of this experience I had with this executive, I can hire
mm,
people of color or whatever. And I just put something on my mind to say, it's not just about me, like you're saying, Bruce. It's about it's not a sacrifice. I wouldn't name it as a sacrifice for me, but it's about giving back. It's about sometimes being symbol and as well as doing the work that we do. And finally, I like to say it's not, being the first, like if we're all around the same age, a lot of firsts, we're just of that first generation. But I always go, but who comes after me?
That's right.
That's how I'm going to determine if really it was an anomaly or we're setting a new pattern. So
Yes.
we'll see.
Thank you. Thank you. Mary, Flo? Yeah.
I'll go next then. I couldn't unmute myself quickly enough a little bit earlier, but I grew up in the CME Church, Christian Methodist Episcopal Church, and I was fifth generation. And so growing up in that denomination, on my mother's side, on my dad's side, generational Baptist, and on each side, generations back, my ancestors, members of the family, were founders of churches in their communities. So being involved in the local community church was always very important. When my mom and dad bought the home that I grew up in, there was a CME church about 4 doors down the street. And I was always convinced that they bought that home because she knew where that church was. And I would walk to Sunday school on Sunday mornings, go back for youth group, choir rehearsal, etc. So there was always a church there, and our family was always very active, very involved in the community. So for me, engaging with others in a way that brought something positive to their lives or being in service was essential, especially for those who were elderly and could not get out as much. We did a lot for people there. And so there was a real foundation and grounding in terms of faith, commitment, and being engaged in the community. My dad was a World War II veteran, and he believed very strongly that that an education was essential. So there was no question. I mean, his words to me were, "You will go to college, you will do these things, you will be a professional." His desire was for me to be a teacher, teach school. That was really not quite where I was extremely gifted. So I moved in another direction, but it was okay with him. But I ended up with positions where there were people in place who wanted to mentor me, work with me, help me to take over after they either left the position or retired. So there were always people who took an interest in me, Black, white, other, and it was exciting. But in addition to that, often being the first African American in certain positions came with all that resistance that people don't always know is there. They'll celebrate your presence, but then the little micro ways of being antagonistic come forward. We were always taught you must move beyond that, look beyond that, look at the big picture, and keep moving forward no matter what. And I've worked hard to do that, to instill that in my own children. I have 3 adult children, and I work hard to encourage them in their work and in their lives, to know that it's important to always have hope, to always be the best you can possibly be, and always to work to leave a positive image as you move forward.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Dr. Flo, any comments?
Yes. Thank you again. I think it was Langston Hughes who in his poem Mother to Son, life for me ain't been no crystal stair. Um, I am in year 32 of ordained ministry. I am a cradle Presbyterian, fourth generation. I grew up in Rice Memorial Presbyterian Church in Atlanta, Georgia, where Black History Month was celebrated on steroids. We literally had a woman who I think had every invention that Black people had. And in the back of the church, there will be a display with signs on it, and all of the children would get a chance to see all these things. And the display kept growing every year. She passed away, and I was asked to do her funeral, Miss Eloise. And she actually had a traffic signal, like a real one, like that hangs up. It was huge. And I was like, where did she get this from? Because she knew that it was important to instill in us as children our history, our real history. And for that, I am eternally grateful. She wasn't an elder in the church, but she was a presence in the church. And I think that those are the roles, particularly of Black women, that I was able to see. And so as a result, recognizing that Black women are the most educated group of people in America right now, you know, and yet we make less pay. In fact, my dissertation dealt with that as it related to the church and the ways in which women, as my colleague Dr. Mary was saying, microaggressions and things of that nature. But at the same time, we have been firsts. I mean, I can't. It's the litany is long for me. You know, first African American to actually serve as a chaplain in the Air National Guard when I was commissioned in 1997. I mean, the whole Air National Guard. I'm the first Black woman. You know, in churches, in leadership, in mid councils. Thanks be to God, I was not the first Black person in Synod of the Mid Atlantic, and I'm standing on the shoulders of Carol Jenkins and Warren Lassane Jr. And so as a result, I feel that surrounding around me that says you can do this and you're just a phone call away. I mean, I can remember in our denomination when Black women would get together, Black clergy women particularly, would get together and have retreats and have times to talk and have times to share, have times to weep, and have times to celebrate. And those are the things I believe that we can still do without denominational money because it's a whole lot easier with technology. And so as a result of that, you know, John S. M. B. T. says, I am because we are, therefore I am. And no matter what accomplishments I've made, it's because of the community that has surrounded me while I was in my mother's womb. I don't want to steal off of Jeremiah, but it's kind of true. You know, I was going to session meetings in my mother's womb. And so as a result of that, that spirit has been instilled in me that you don't quit, you don't give up, you don't give out, you don't give in, because that persistence is what I have needed as a Black same gender loving woman. And to even normalize that. When I introduce my wife, it's my wife and I keep moving. I don't make any excuses anymore. I don't need to explain my life to you. I've gotten letters written to me about, you know, your lifestyle. I'm like, thank you. Next, you know, your opinion about that doesn't matter. I've gotten pushback from people challenging me just because I'm a woman, not understanding that I'm a military woman. So pushback is not what's going to work with you. With me.
That's right.
And so I've had to stand my ground. I've had to be quiet so that other people can fight the battle for me. And that's why our colleagues are so important, especially in a white denomination. But I can remember, Dr. James Costin was president of ITC when I was there, and I could walk into his office at any time because I said to him, "You are my pastor now. My pastor passed away. You are it." And if he wasn't busy, he would say, "Come on in, Floretta." And we would sit and we would talk and we would chat. I was blessed to have Rita Dixon. Um,
Yes, yes.
in fact, when I accepted my call to ministry, my parents scooped me up and we said, "We're going to see Rita to make sure that this is real." And she looked at my parents and said, you know, Lawrence and Fly said, "This baby is called," you know. And that kind of affirmation. And like you said, your pastor, Lonnie Oliver, all of these folks who have shaped us. And now I'm talking too much, but now I feel responsible
Yeah.
and to make certain that more African Americans can get into mid-council leadership, first of all, and particularly women, second
Yeah.
of all, but to make certain that doors are opening instead of closing, and making certain that as I think I'm on the wind down now at this age. I'm not looking for the next 30 years of ministry. you know, I'm on the wind down. And so what I want to make certain of is that others can come and the way be a little bit easier, just a little bit easier than it was for me.
Yes, yes, thank you. I see my brother has chimed in from Grace Presbytery, Chris Lee. We're glad to have you today. And thank you. You're joining this good conversation. I want to say that one of the things that we've touched on here and there, but we haven't talked about what it has been like a lot for us being in white spaces and either claiming our seat or just being able to sit there and to have our seat, and what that has been like. One of the things that I would say that shaped my leadership was the understanding that you will need to persevere, that there will be resistance. There will be resistance to just the package that you come in, that you could not be mediocre. There is just no room for that. And even as a young child, I was raised Roman Catholic, and I claimed both Philadelphia and Columbia, South Carolina as home. And so my aunts in Philadelphia were those that were creators of programs. The Women's Christian Alliance in Philadelphia, which was the first foster care and adoption agency for Black people in the city, was run by my aunt Sarah Collins for more than 40 plus years. And my mother, who was a nurse, she died very young, but she was a nurse. And my father, who was going to raise us by himself, 7 kids, was going to raise us, but then to see the extended family, what it was like for them to become those surrogates for us, and to have aunts that sat down and read to you and told you the stories of the possibilities of what could happen in life. But my grandfather, who would always say, I have a 6th grade education, he was a baker, and it probably was one of the best bakers. I haven't had baked items that tasted as good as his, and he could decorate cakes and was always called upon. But I remember my grandfather would look at us, and it was 5 girls and 2 boys, and he would basically say, prepare for resistance in this life. Prepare for people to underestimate you. Prepare that no matter who you are and what you have to offer, you're not defined by what other people think of you, but do your best. And that was the thing that he would say, do your very best. And then when you've done that, give it to God and be okay with the contributions that you are able to make. But Chris, I want to get you in this conversation, brother. We're so glad that you can join us. And it was such a privilege to be with you and Mary last week. As we were on the campus of Columbia Theological Seminary for a partnership meeting. Chris, what would you say as you join this conversation to talk about why it's important to continue to talk about Black history, if that's something that you want to respond to. But the other question would be is, what has shaped you in your leadership as a leader, and what has that meant for you working in predominantly white spaces? Thank you for being here.
Well, thank you for having me. And hello to everyone who's made time to be on this call. It's good to see you all. I would just simply say it's important to have the conversation, because if you don't have the conversation, there's a clear effort to erase and rewrite history. And one of the things that I lament is that many folks that I encounter act like this attempt is something new. This has been going on for a long time. Now it's just that this kind of perspective has been given life and legs in a way it has not been in many years since my grandparents were actively fighting this sort of stuff. I would just say it's important in terms of how I have encountered this space. And I don't know how everyone has kind of entered this question, but I have been in this church now since my early college years. And in every single ministry, every part, I have been the first person of my kind in wherever it was ever. And it holds true even in this role. And so it's important that we keep the conversation going, because many of the same issues are still prevalent. I grew up playing tennis. I run into this form of, and what I will call, some people will say, oh, it's just happenstance. I call it as veiled racism. I've been at a few national gatherings over the last 2 weeks, and folks will see my championship ring and they'll say, oh, what did you play? Basketball? And then the next one's football. And then I say, no, I played tennis, actually. I was one of the top junior tennis players in the country. And that's why it's important, because many of the same assumptions. And so one of my coaches, who was one of the only Black men to run their own club in South Florida, in West Palm Beach, Florida, who worked with many Black players. It was a public club. And he always impressed upon this, the importance of how important it was for us to be excellent in what it is that we do. And he would sit us down and we would watch video clips of John McEnroe, and we would watch video clips of Arthur Ashe. And he would always remind us that you can't act like John McEnroe. That racket needs to be kept in your hand. Your curse words you need to keep to yourself. Because of art, and he would watch video clips of Arthur Ashe. And he would say, do you see how this brother is carrying himself? His racket stays in his hand, and those words you would never hear from his mouth. And it's not a value judgment against John McEnroe, one of the greatest tennis players ever lived, obviously. However, there were two different worlds, even though it was the same tour. And so that was always impressed upon me. So there are even times in my work life when I hold that space, when I want to say what I really think and how I'm really feeling, I go back to sitting and watching those old videos that I have to come at things a little bit different. Because if all of us know in the spaces that we are, these spaces have been exclusively reserved for white voices in the leadership positions we hold. But now that we are, many are in these roles now, there's a whole nother level of education and conversation that we have to have, because as human beings, we're all different, but particularly with cultural differences, I am not like most of the people I work with. I don't think like they do. And so it's just different. And so that's why it's important to have the conversation, because many just assume, and they also get a little nervous, as you all know this as well. You know, I could say something, and then it's a whole big come apart. But if someone else were to say the same exact thing that was not in my skin, it's all good. But if I say it, it's different. It's somehow perceived. Where who do I think I am? Or what's he on? Oh, he sure is full of himself, isn't he? And I typically know what's next. but we'll save that for another day.
Thank you for keeping it real. I mean, that's true. It is so true. It may not be all of our experiences, but certainly we've had these experiences. And even if they're not communicated, sometimes they slip in. Um, I remember, just to get us started a little bit more, I remember after being in this role, I've been now in this role since 2021. I was first transitional and then made permanent. But I remember that after being in this role, there was someone who was on the finance committee who made the conversation, I mean, who made the statement that we need to be careful about the money, that all of a sudden the monies was not going to be used in correct ways. And there was question raised about the use of finances and wanting to put additional tabs on the way that I had discretion around certain accounts that was never a part of the repertoire for my predecessor or anyone else. And there were questions raised. And I thought, from what I've seen, I question that. But anyway, but there are little things that come out that are microaggressions, that are assumptions about our experiences, our preparedness that often come out. And so sometimes in these roles, really going back and pulling from what has sustained us. I mean, my grandparents would say, when you go out in public, you remember that you are a Gallman, or you remember that you're from the Browns, don't embarrass us. Well, that was one part of it. But then the other part was, remember that you are a Gallman. Remember that you are a Brown. There was a certain strength that they expected. There was a certain, there was something that was poured in you to say that you can weather some of these things. One artist said that her mother told her that you weren't made to break and bend in these ways. And going back and pulling on those affirmations carry us when we are in these roles. Thank God we're in these roles. We celebrate these roles, but the reality is we go back often and have to do the self-talk to be able to sustain ourselves and to be able to be instruments in the roles that we're in. I don't know if there's some other questions or comments.
Well,
Yeah.
let me piggyback on that. And so there are a couple challenges I found in the role as African American mid-council leader. One has to do with whenever there's an issue in the news around African Americans, I am expected to have an opinion or a comment or something, and that works both ways, because there's also times, especially like during George Floyd was the toughest one, where there was this race tension in the air, and I got crickets. There was no support. There was never a, "Hey, Craig, how are you doing?" or anything like that. And that taught me that we don't expect that. That's what it taught me. That's just not the party we're in. But the other thing that we're challenged, at least I should say I'm challenged with, is how do we deal with African American churches? How do we deal with African American pastors? How do we deal with African American staff? Because there's this, I'll just say it. One part of it is African American churches are often just left alone. You just don't say nothing. We don't say nothing. You do your thing. We don't, And so then I come in and suddenly it's like, "Hey, what about us?" And so it is about how to provide the appropriate resources to a forgotten people, or how to adjust the resources because they were provided in the liberal white, "oh, just help the black church" thing that sometimes happens in our in our denomination. Maybe it's just my presbyteries that I've served, but there just seems to be oh, just let it slide, whatever. And it's like, no, we can be accountable. At the same time, there are resources that are deserved, and we should make sure that those flow as well. And that's just part of the challenge. So yeah, that's a couple of my experiences, and then the hardest one that I don't even want to say out loud is the back of the mind question: is it because you're Black?
Mm.
You've been asked to do this. Could you do this? Is it because I'm Black I'm being asked to do this? Oh, this happened. This happened. Is it there? Are they saying that because I'm Black? You know, and that to me is almost like the question that unravels the sweater. If you start going down that road, it's like for me, it just messes with your head. Am I really qualified? Am I really good enough? The irony, think about it. All of us on this screen have doctorate degrees. Chris, I don't know about you, but I see these young guys are coming in under the wire and getting away with stuff. But because we've been put into I don't know about y'all, but it's almost like you gotta overqualify to be able to do this thing. So yeah, that is it because I'm Black thing. That's the one that I'm still struggling with.
You just brought another one for me. It's what happens to me often is I don't know if any of you have had this experience, but I will get almost a talking to or almost a finger wag. And it's happened several times when it comes to issues of diversity. And I almost want to tell folk, like, look who you're talking to. I understand. I understand, but like that has happened where they're like, well, and I'm just thinking like, yeah, I know a little something about that. But we'll try to like correct me or challenge something because of course they know that I'm a 46-year-old Black male, so they know exactly who and how I vote. They know exactly what I think about. They know exactly what I like to do for fun. They know everything about me because they just think they know what we are all like. And I can't tell you how many assumptions people have made about me in spaces, particularly Committee on Ministry spaces, COR spaces, and they'll just make these assumptions. And it's like, no, that's actually not what I think. If you want to know what I think, just ask, but don't assume. And I don't know if that happens to you all, but that's one of the things that with that overqualification, then I also feel like I have to like really, whenever there's a conversation about diversity, that I should just be, yes, you're volunteering, or yes, you're going to come. Well, no, we have people. There's actually a few more people on my staff that would be better in that space, that have more expertise in that area. And just because I am the only African American on my staff does not make me the authority on diversity. In fact, I can tell you 3 people on my staff who are better in that space than I am, but of course I should be. You brought that up, Craig. Sorry, when you talked about the overqualified piece.
Yeah, so often we are charged with teaching, being the teachers about our race and everything. And I think that there's a responsibility on others to learn, or to at least engage us in ways that invite us to be who we are, to be able to share our stories, and yet be able to see this beautiful melanin that God has given us and all that we are. Our time is getting a little bit short, and I do want to ask you to talk a little bit about what's been transformative since you've been in your role. You might want to respond to that. We've talked a little bit about hope and our faith, but what are the signs of courage that you have and possibilities? And maybe you want to talk about meaningful change emerging that you see today. So any one of those as we begin to wrap up.
I was gonna.
Feel free, Kat.
I saw
Craig.
Rose. I'm sorry. I'll just say for me, uh, the most exciting and inspiring pieces are around new worshiping communities. Because my ongoing joke is the bread is coming out the oven and it's brown. And so to see the energy coming from the new worshiping communities that are developing with people of color, that are embracing this thing we call the Reformed tradition. It is exciting, and I see a lot of hope in that direction.
Thank you. Thank you.
Actually, that's kind of what I was going to talk about. My daughter and son-in-law are helping plan a church in Los Angeles. Now, it's not a Presbyterian church, but it's nesting in a Presbyterian church. But to see the young families, the young people, the way the church grew out of a classroom to an auditorium in a school, and now taking up a whole section of the church, to see their dedication. And both my son and daughter-in-law are educators, and they're growing new ministries, marriage ministries, educational ministries. My daughter, my daughter teaches at UC Irvine, and she specializes in kind of how families of color are educating their own children and advocating for education for their own children, coming out of the pandemic. And she has this whole thing that she's studying called Black Imaginaries. And I'm so fascinated to understand what this generation of young people that came out of AIDS epidemic, the fall of the Twin Towers, the pandemic, they are brave. They are courageous. They are taking on, and they are not rattled in the way that perhaps we are rattled by what is happening now, because it seems like they're equipped and they're they're ready to analyze and take steps. They're nimble, in how they're ready to respond, and they prioritize building community. Church for them is not liturgy. Church is not bound by liturgy. It is about community. It is about showing up for one another in ways that matter. And I think we have a lot to learn from them, and I am deeply concerned as I do my work, traveling around representing the foundation. I am concerned that we tell that story, that is important to tell that story in ways that will activate hope. Because I see so many churches convinced that they're not going to make it. But all around them are the mission field, the children, the young people. I started out by saying the Maasai greeting.
Yes.
How are the children? And we know the children are not well. We know they're not well. So what are we going to do about it?
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yes. Flo, Bruce?
I
I'll
will
just
pick
piggyback.
up
Go
from,
ahead.
no, you go ahead, Dr. Flo.
Thank you. I was going to say it's hard to say some of the things that I've been saying because they've marred me. The church hurt is real. At the same time, I think that there are glimmers of hope. There's possibility. I like what I like what Reverend Dr. Craig Howard said about 1001 new worshiping communities. You put the bread in and it's coming out brown. That's where the growth has emerged. At the same time, the other part of that story is that new worshiping communities had a sunset when it started. And it was supposed to help white churches grow. And the bread came out brown. So when you celebrate, there's always that other story about intent and then impact. So I think that that's where my hope is. What God meant for, what the devil meant for evil, God meant for good.
Mm-hmm.
You
Mm-hmm.
know, and you know, the pastorate that I stayed in the longest, 18 years. I was a first, but it was a rough road there. But then I stayed there for 18 years. You know, and it was an interracial congregation. It was 70% white and 30% black. And then it flipped, and then it became primarily an African American congregation. And that wasn't intentional. It's just what was.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that those glimpses of truth thou hast for me, you
Mm-hmm.
know, if we can open our eyes and see what's really going on, instead of focusing on the muck and the miry, because the muck and the miry is always there,
That's
but
right.
what you focus on amplifies. So my thing is, you know, what is God up to, and being open to seeing that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you. My brother.
Yes, I'll continue with this thread to say that one of the joys that I have the opportunity to share is that I get to visit congregations. I get to travel around and spend time making connection with a variety of congregations throughout New Hope Presbytery. And as Dr. Flo and Dr. Craig and Dr. Rose have said, the bread is coming out brown. And I just have to be honest, it makes me smile because I see disciples being formed. I see the stirring of imagination. I'm thinking of one in particular right now in which they feed 800 families per week.
My goodness.
They provide after school enrichment programs where the families that these children come from, English is their second language. And all of that just excites me and makes me filled with hope.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
thank you.
Well, I want to thank you all for being a part of this conversation. And I want to say where I find hope. I find hope when I engage with you. I am just thrilled every time I get a chance to be in conversation with you. You are inspiring. You're doing work that maybe, you may have always known you could do it, but there's some folks who didn't know that you could do this, and you're doing it. You're doing this work. We're spreading the gospel. We are living out our faith. It's transformative. Your smiles mean something when we see them. You reaching out and us being in support of one another, understanding our struggles, because our struggles are real. This church today is not the church we prepared for. It's not the church of our grandmothers, of our mothers. It's not even the church that we trained for. And yet God has called us to this moment. And this moment is, we are called to it and we're equipped for it. And I am thankful for you, for your voice, for the gifts that you bring, for this time of talking about history and how it has shaped and formed us, and the necessity of our stories continue to be told, and the place that we find ourselves in history. So I want to thank you for being a part of this panel. Now, I don't want to stop. If anybody has a last comment, I'll give you a chance for just one last burning comment if you have it. Anybody has a burning comment that you just need to get in before we close?
I kind of do.
Okay, come on, Rose.
Sandonna gave me the privilege of charging her
Oh, yes, yes.
when she was installed in her permanent role. And that my charge was live, because
Mhm.
I've seen too many of us not be able to handle the stress, the challenges, and I sort of unpack that, But for us today, I just want to say, let us do the kind of self-care. I have grieved and mourned too many of us too many of us leaving too soon. And so let us teach the self-care wherever we go. Let us live. I love that Sandana is now painting and she shares her beautiful paintings with us. Let us all find that space of creativity and that really feeds our lives and our spirits, and find that balance that feeds our lives and our spirits. Because that's really, by passing along those tools to new generations, we will. And now I'm talking to myself. I'm preaching to myself. I'm gonna get up and go take a walk the minute this ends, and say everything else can wait. I need to get out and walk, even though it's snowy outside. So just live, my brothers and my sisters, live.
Thank you. Thank you so much.